Good evening and welcome to Vatican Connections. I'm your host, Noel Okel. This week, the presidents from each of the episcopal conferences from around the world will convene in Rome at the Pope's request for the much-anticipated Protection of Minors in the Church Summit. This in response to the clerical abuse crisis that's been plaguing the Catholic Church. And on the eve of this event, the world is wondering what exactly will come out of this unprecedented meeting of church and religious leaders. But that's our feature story for tonight. But before we get to that, let's have a quick look at some of the other stories we cover in tonight's show. A major appointment for a US Cardinal at the Vatican last Thursday to a very important and historically significant position. We'll tell you who got the job as a new Vatican Camerlengo, what it is, and what the position entails. 88 years ago on February 12, 1931, the Pope sent a message to the world in Morse Code. And that was the beginning of what we now know as Vatican Radio. A big win for the Catholic community in the UK as one of their very own gets the green light for canonization after a second miracle was approved by the Vatican. Details later in the show. And finally, 7 months after resigning from the College of Cardinals for credible sexual misconduct allegations, this former high-ranking ex-cardinal is officially laicized and is removed from clerical state. I have all of that and more coming up on Vatican Connections up next, so be sure to stay tuned. Okay, let's begin with a quick look at some of the headlines from the Vatican since our episode last week, beginning with the Pope's message during his Sunday Angelus address. And from the balcony of his study, the Holy Father greeted the faithful, and before reciting the Marian prayer, he invited those gathered at St. Peter's Square to reflect on the profound meaning of having faith, which the Pope says consists of totally trusting in the Lord.
Pope Francis explained how Jesus declares the poor, the hungry, the afflicted, the persecuted, blessed.
Gesù dichiara beati I poveri, gli affamati, gli afflitti, I perseguitati.
While he admonishes those who are rich, well-fed, who laugh and are acclaimed by people. He went on to say that the woe to you phrase, addressed to those who are doing well today, serves to awaken them from the dangerous deception of selfishness and open them up to the logic of love while they still have time. The Beatitudes of Jesus, Pope Francis concluded, are a decisive message which spurs us on not to place our trust in material and transitory things, not to seek happiness by following the sellers of smoke and the professionals of illusion. The Lord, he said, helps us to open our eyes, to acquire a more penetrating look at reality, to heal from the chronic myopia, that which the worldly spirit infects us. With this paradoxical word, he shakes us up and makes us recognize what really enriches us, satisfies us, and gives us joy and dignity.
Also over the weekend, the Vatican has confirmed the Pope's decision to officially and formally remove ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the former Cardinal and Archbishop of Washington, from the priesthood. The Vatican announced the decision on Saturday, saying that the ex-cardinal was found guilty of solicitation in the sacrament of confession and sins against the Sixth Commandment with both minors and adults, and with the aggravating factor of abuse of power. McCarrick was consecrated a bishop in 1977, becoming an auxiliary in the Archdiocese of New York. Since then, he has risen through the episcopal ranks, eventually becoming the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. in 2000. It was Pope St. John Paul II who elevated him to a cardinal in 2001. Now, the order to remove McCarrick from the clerical state means that the former cardinal loses all rights and duties associated with being a priest. He cannot, under any circumstance, present himself as a priest and is absolutely forbidden to celebrate any of the sacraments. The only exception is to grant absolution to a person in imminent danger of death. The only other church penalty that's more severe than being laicized is excommunication. Cardinal John Henry Newman is en route to sainthood. On Wednesday, the Holy Father authorized the Congregation for the Causes of Saints to promulgate 8 decrees, including those of Blessed Cardinal Newman, after a second miracle attributed to his intercession was officially recognized, thus giving the green light for his canonization. Born in London in 1801, Cardinal John Henry Newman was at first an Anglican priest, but left the Church of England and his teaching post at Oxford in 1845 when he was received into the Catholic Church. He was quickly ordained as a Catholic priest and continued as an influential religious leader based in Birmingham. In 1879, he was created a cardinal by Pope Leo XIII in recognition of his services to the cause of the Catholic Church in England. Cardinal Newman died in August of 1890, and it was Pope Benedict XVI who beatified him in September of 2010. The Catholic Church celebrates his feast day on October the 9th. The Vatican-approved miracle that opened the way for Newman's canonization centers around the unexplainable healing that took place in Chicago. The Archdiocese of Chicago investigated the healing of a pregnant woman who prayed for Newman's intercession after unstoppable internal bleeding threatened her life and that of her babies. After her miraculous cure, the physicians testified that they could not explain her cure and had no scientific explanation for her sudden recovery. Now, the last time the English saw one of their kinsmen canonized was in 1970 when Pope Paul VI canonized the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. So you can imagine that this is a big deal for the Catholic community in the UK. No dates have yet been announced for the official canonization ceremony, but I'll let you know as details become available. Now, let's move on now to our next story. Last week, a major appointment was announced at the Vatican, an appointment of a US Cardinal to a historically significant and prestigious role. Allison Kenny has the details on what the role is, who got the job, and what it entails.
Thanks, Noel. Pope Francis has nominated Irish-American Cardinal Kevin Farrell, prefect of the Dicastery for the Laity, Family, and Life, to be the Vatican's next camerlango, or chamberlain. The camerlango is essentially a key role during a period of papal transition. After a pope dies and is officially declared dead by a doctor, the Cardinal Camerlengo becomes the person in charge of the administration of Vatican City State, which, as we all know, is its own sovereign country. This period between the death or resignation of one pope and the election of another is called the sede vacante, which in Latin means the seat being vacant. The camerlengo is the one who takes possession of the late pope's ring of fishermen and cuts it with shears in the presence of the cardinals. Doing this symbolizes the end of the late pope's authority and prevents its use as a seal on forged documents. The camerlengo is also the one who gives official notice of the pope's death to officers of the Roman Curia and the dean of the College of Cardinals. Now, the camerlengo resides in the Vatican Palace while performing all his duties and is one of the only positions held by individuals within the Holy See that do not become vacant upon the death of a reigning pontiff. The others, in case you're curious, are the papal almoner, the archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica, the head of the Tribunal of Apostolic Penitentiary, and the vicars general of the City of Rome and Vatican City State. The camerlengo position had been vacant since last July, when the previous office holder, French Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran, passed away at the age of 75. Cardinal Tauran had been the Vatican's camerlengo since 2014. You might remember Cardinal Tauran as the one who gave the famous cry of Habemus Papam from St. Peter's balcony on the night of the election of Pope Francis. Now, the history of the camerlengo position is an interesting one. In modern times, the camerlengo is always a cardinal, but that wasn't the case prior to the 1600s. And as recently as 1996, the camerlengo was in charge of both administration of Vatican State and governing the Church. However, it's been the law that leadership of the Catholic Church during the sede vacante has been the responsibility of the College of Cardinals for the past 23 years. In years past, the camerlengo would also have been the person who took possession of the Pope's last will and testament and was responsible for publicly revealing its contents. But under current rules, the last will and testament of the Pope is only safeguarded by the camerlengo, who then gives it to the College of Cardinals during that group's first meeting of the sede vacante period. Now, as for Cardinal Farrell, even before his appointment to the position of camerlengo, he was already the highest-ranking American citizen in the Vatican. His Eminence Kevin J. Farrell is 71 years old, but was born in Ireland and holds American citizenship. He was made a cardinal by Pope Francis on November 19, 2016. I had the pleasure of meeting the cardinal briefly in Rome during one of the famous coffee breaks that takes place during the Synod of Bishops, and he has also been part of several Salt and Light programs, including an episode of Witness with Father Thomas Rosica. We also hosted him in our studios during the special pre-synod Canada-wide Youth Forum that took place in the fall of 2017. And ultimately, while the role of camerlango is certainly a key one at what is always a very tumultuous time of upheaval within the Church, it's also an incredible honor to the individual upon which it's bestowed. Thanks, Noel, and now back to you.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, now here's an interesting story. Would you believe that the first ever message from a pope transmitted on the airwaves was in Morse Code? In fact, it was exactly 88 years ago on February the 12th in 1931 that Vatican Radio was born. Vatican Radio, known as the Pope's Radio, was officially inaugurated with Pope Pius XI delivering the first ever radio message by a pope. 4 days after the signing of the Lateran Treaty and the creation of Vatican City-State, on February 11, 1929, Pope Pius XI commissioned an Italian radio pioneer and scientist, Guglielmo Marconi, to build a radio station inside the new state. And just 2 years and a day later, on the 12th of February 1931, the very first papal transmission was sent. It was a test message in Morse Code that said in Latin, "In nomine Domini, Amen," in the name of the Lord, Amen. Then Guglielmo Marconi himself introduced the message of the Pope. Speaking in Italian, Marconi said, "I have the highest honor of announcing that in only a matter of seconds, the Supreme Pontiff, Pope Pius XI, will inaugurate the radio station of Vatican City-State. The electric radio waves will carry to all the world his words of peace and blessing." Then Pope Pius himself addressed the world with a universal pastoral message and became the first pope in history to address the world on radio. And since then, Vatican Radio has been in the service of 8 popes, but has significantly changed since its first radio transmission to the world. And today, programming at Vatican Radio is offered in over 47 different languages, with its content being produced by over 200 journalists in 61 different countries. And because of expansion and growth over the years, Vatican Radio moved in 1970 to its present headquarters in Rome, just outside of Vatican City. And following the current Pope's communications reform, Vatican Radio was absorbed into the Dicastery for Communications, ending the organization's 85 years of independent operation. And let's now move on to our feature story for tonight. The world's eyes and ears will be on the Vatican this week during the unprecedented gathering of the world's Catholic Church leaders to discuss the protection of minors in the Church against the plague of clergy abuse. When the Pope first announced the international summit back in September, it sparked an optimistic note that the worldwide problem of abuse would finally be tackled with a global coordinated effort. And on the eve of the historic event, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith spoke at the press conference on Monday to outline the Vatican's hopes and reset expectations for the summit meeting. And CNS brings you this report.
Archbishop Charles Scicluna of Malta, who handles abuse cases as adjunct secretary of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, was part of a panel of speakers at a news conference February 18th to outline the Vatican's plans and hopes for the summit meeting on the protection of minors in the Church. Archbishop Scicluna said that many Catholic bishops had or have a natural reaction of disbelief when one of their priests is accused of sexually abusing a child. But he underlined that such reactions are no longer tolerable.
We realize that a leader who is confronted with the very, very traumatic space of somebody who should be in leadership, caring for people, being an abuser, it's always a shock to the leader. It's also a shock to the community. The first immediate response is almost to deny what has happened. So denial is such a natural response, but it's not sufficient. It's a primitive mechanism that we need to move forward from, move away from. And so whether it's criminal or malicious complicity and a code of silence, or whether it's denial, which is trauma in its very primitive state, We need to go away from that, and that's why the third day of this important meeting is going to be on transparency. This need to break any code of silence, any complicity with denial. And we have to face the facts, because only truth, the truth of the matter, the truth of the factual and confronting with the facts will make us free.
Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago told reporters that Pope Francis wants to hold bishops accountable.
The Holy Father wants to make very clear that to the bishops around the world, not only those participating, that each one of them has to claim responsibility and ownership for this problem, and that there's going to be every effort to close whatever loopholes there are, to make sure that people understand on an individual basis as bishops what their responsibilities are, but then also to give them concrete steps so that we understand exactly what's expected, because they are going to be held accountable.
The meeting February 21st to 24th was to bring together almost 190 church leaders, including the presidents of national bishops' conferences, the heads of the Eastern Catholic churches, superiors of religious orders of men and women, Roman Curia officials, and invited experts and guest speakers.
Now, despite this, however, many survivors and experts have cautioned that it's too unrealistic to assume that such a brief meeting could deliver a solution to such a deep-rooted problem that's been hidden in the Church for so long. So the question is, what exactly should the world expect from this 4-day summit? Our very own Father Tom Rosica was asked by the summit organizers to participate in the meetings, and he joins us now in Rome to give us an idea of who the key players are and what the world could realistically expect from these meetings, which will no doubt go down in history as one of the most important summits in the pontificate of Pope Francis.
I'm Father Tom Rosica here on the terrace of the Jesuit Generalate, the Curia Generalizia in Rome. Just behind me, of course, you can see a bit of the cupola of St. Peter's Basilica. We're right close to the Vatican here. And this is a week unlike other weeks in Rome. This is not a synod of bishops. It's not a canonization. It's not a conclave. But it's a very special meeting that Pope Francis has called for the heads of the episcopal conferences of the world, the presidents of the bishops' conferences, plus a group of major superiors of men and women, and members of the Roman Curia gathered together to speak and talk very seriously about the abuse crisis, and most particularly about the protection of minors. This is the reason for which the Pope called this meeting, because it's no secret that the crisis of the abuse of children, of minors, has been extremely serious and kind of reached a head over the past year as we heard more revelations come forward, not just from North America, but from many parts of the world. And Pope Francis, in his deep pastoral care for everyone in the Church, wants this theme of the protection of minors to be high on the agenda of every bishops' conference. The North American Church, that is the Church in the United States and Canada, have really been in the vanguard of addressing this situation. We know what happened to the United States in the year 2002 and the Dallas Charter which followed, but there were still some open-ended questions and unfinished business from that charter, particularly regarding the responsibility of bishops in overseeing their diocese and assuring the protection of minors. The Canadian bishops faced this issue head-on in the 1980s and early 1990s and began establishing protocols. The most recent set of protocols were approved in September of 2018, and they are being held up as an example of a best practice. The meeting here in Rome this week is not the magic solution to the end of abuse of minors. It is rather a decided, clear attempt of the Church to say, no more. This must end. We must have protocols in place. There must be a call for accountability, for transparency, and especially what do we do with bishops and with religious superiors and leaders who have not been attentive and who have not shown this to be a major priority. In the Synod Hall, where this meeting will take place, the Holy Father will be present, presiding over all of the sessions, along with 190 delegates or people invited to this conference, presidents of the Episcopal Conference, which include several cardinals, members of the Roman Curia, and members of the Union of Superiors General of Women and of Men. I will be here working in the communications team to be sure that the very large media assembly that's here from all over the world can get the proper information, and the Vatican has done a very good job in getting that information out. You can see on our website flashed the special website that was created for this event. You'll see it now on the screen, and you can see the information, the media kit, the details, the schedule. It is only a 4-day meeting. It is not a week meeting or a month meeting like Synods of Bishops, but much can be accomplished in 4 days to set the direction and also to look forward to the follow-up, which is absolutely essential to this meeting. Archbishop Charles Scicluna, who's a member of the organizing committee, the Archbishop of Malta, Toronto-born, and who is also the adjunct secretary of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, has spoken eloquently and powerfully about what this meeting is about. And you can see a special witness interview that will be airing shortly on Salt and Light Television. We are invited to pray for this meeting, to pray for the success, that the words that are spoken, the ideas set forward, the new direction set forward, really enter the mind and heart of everyone throughout the world. Not just North America, but every single country, because in some countries, this may not be high on the priority agenda. There are cultural differences, all kinds of other factors, and what Pope Francis is trying to do is what he laid out in his pastoral letter to the people of God in August of 2018. This question of the protection of minors must be high on the agenda for everyone. I'm Father Tom Rosica in Rome. Stay tuned for more reporting this week from the Vatican.
And during the course of this week, we'll bring you a special coverage of the event on our network, including highlight summary of each day's event on Perspectives Daily. And for more information, you can visit our website at saltandlighttv.org. And that's our show for the week. If you'd like to have any of your questions answered on Vatican Connections, drop us a line on the Salt and Light Facebook page or on my Twitter handle listed below. I'm Noel Local. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week here on Vatican Connections.